when you talk about, that variety thing, and variety is definitely the spice of life, when it comes to music, because like you said, there's just so much out there. Just what do you think the benefits are for people who may be stuck on a certain genre? Like, there might be some people who just listen to a certain kind of
Mm.
West Coast rap, or people who listen to jazz fusion, or people who listen to punk rock, or people who just stick with 80s pop. How does it make how do you think expanding your musical palette makes you a better listener, not just a fan but a listener as a whole?
Interestingly, like I've thought about the question you just posed, like being a generalist versus a specialist, like only listening to one genre or one niche part of one genre versus listening to a bunch of different genres. And I actually think that to have a healthy music culture, we kind of need both, to be honest. You need, I think, for like preservation, and to help people who are new to genres, you need those diehard fans who like are really, really hyper focused on one thing.
I have a guest on the screen, and he is a music journalist who is doing the Lord's work, in my humble opinion. He's written for Red Bull Music Academy, he's written for Okayplayer, Hip Hop DX, Roland. He's done a ton of great work, and right now he's the curator of you've seen Microchop and 1,000 Spins on Twitter. If you haven't already, please go find those two Twitter feeds. You will be glad you did. It is my honor and privilege to have Mr. Gino Sorcinelli join me today. Gino, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing good, Chris. Thanks so much for having me on. Really
All right,
excited to be here.
I'm happy to have you on, obviously, and just let's talk about where it started for you, musically, because music fans, we all have like our own little unique story of how we became so entrenched in this art form. But where do you think it start? Where would you say it started for you?
Oh, that's a great question. Where it started for me. So growing up, my parents always had music on in the house. So my dad used to listen to a pretty broad range of stuff. Like both of my parents were into kind of like a mix of like singer songwriter stuff, classic rock, and then like R&B, soul stuff too. And they, we just always had music on in the background when we were younger. I was saying something on Twitter the other day about how my dad had a Drifters Golden Hits cassette tape that we liked so much that like we literally played it until it was like unplayable and he had to go get another copy of it. So like that was sort of I think that was like the beginning for me, was my parents and my family just really liked music. Like I remember it always being on. My dad got one of those like Columbia music house like 12 CDs for the price
For
of deals.
yeah,
And me and my sisters each got to like get a CD, and we were always like, once we kind of had a little bit of disposable income as we got older, we were always like kind of buying music. I probably bought the most out of everyone, but like talking about music, it was just like a thing in the house. And then also I had like a really good friend group. I was very lucky in middle, high school, and college. I just had a lot of friends that really liked music, that like talking about it, sharing it. I remember in high school, like we used to just go around um, for car rides and kind of like play different stuff. Back then it was mixed CDs and mixed tapes. And a lot of my friends, heavily influenced my tastes. Like they would put me on to new things. I would share stuff with them. Media wasn't as accessible as it is now. You couldn't just like have everything in one place. So that's a thing I kind of miss about, my life now, is I feel like when I was younger, there are all these social opportunities to just hang out with people and listen to music in groups, and I feel like
yes.
that doesn't really happen, at least for me, as much as it used to. And I think part of it's just like a product of getting older too. But those were like hugely influential times, like being young, family, friends, influencing me and introducing me to music and helping me kind of develop my own um, style and taste and appreciation of things. And then I think one of the things um, that started when I was young too, is I started liking making mixtapes and mix CDs, like for my sisters, for my friends.
Mhm.
And I think that's where a lot of like the curation, um, interest in curation and sharing music comes from.
Now that was going to be my next question because obviously, we live in a different time, as you stated. Back then, you had to really do what people call crate digging. Now things are a little more accessible, but what you do with microchop and thousand spins, if you guys aren't familiar, microchop is the Twitter feed where Gino sort of breaks down, beat making, and of course, in this genre, in all genres, but especially in hip hop and R&B, that is one of the primary forms. And of course, the thousand spins is the stuff that kind of flies under the radar. Back what my uncle and my mom used to call dusty grooves, like the stuff that you would like find in a record bin somewhere in like a five and dime store or whatever. But do you think now that because of the internet, that sense of discovery that we used to have when we were younger, because a lot of folks don't understand how that feeling of having to try to find a song on the radio, missing it, and then having to wait for it to come back around, and then just do you think that the internet and the way streaming has gone has kind of taken away from that feeling of discovery a little bit?
That's a really great question, and it's one I think about a lot. It's actually I'm glad you asked that because um, I shared so I made a playlist. One of the microchop playlists I made was called "Sample Ideas Songs People Haven't Sampled Yet," and I
Okay.
shared the YouTube version of it the other day, and it did really well on Twitter. It got like a lot of engagement, and some of the responses were positive, and some of them were like, crate digging is a lost art form now, and like this is so stupid. Like, why would you, give people the ideas and the music? Like, why would you just share it with them? Like, people should go out and find it for themselves. I and I understand that to a degree. I think I don't want to say the sense of discovery is gone. I think it's just different now.
Okay.
That's the way I look at it, and I think it's easy when you get older to look at anything that's new as like worse than when you were younger, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
I,
Absolutely.
right, like we're all guilty of that sometimes. And I mean, like, sure, there are things I miss about. I do know what you mean with the excitement of discovery. Like there was something about having to track down. Like I remember growing up, I grew up in a college town in Massachusetts, Amherst, Massachusetts. We had like a local record store that would have, they would get like mixtapes from like, like Mr. C, DJ Clue, Tony Touch, stuff like that from New York. Someone from the high school that you're friends with would like go get that tape. You'd get another one. You'd be listening to like the new freestyles. And it was like not everyone had that thing. So the fact that you or your friend had it was kind of cool. And then you would kind of like share stuff. And I do think there is some of that magic of new discovery, like waiting. I'm sure you remember this, like waiting to go to the record store to actually buy the album when it came out, like on the
Yes.
day of release, used to
Hmm.
be like an event, right?
Yes.
And I do miss things like that. I do. I think there's some of that magic, at least for me, that like isn't quite the same with the way things are today. But I also think I honestly think, in a way, there's some positives about the modern era of how we listen to and share and distribute music that didn't exist before. One of my favorite places to just kind of hang out and find new things is on YouTube. You have all these amazing curators who take like old out of print vinyl, bootlegs, like cassette tapes, and make rips of them and share them. And you literally can't find these things like anywhere else unless you have the physical copy of it. And a lot of times it's really rare stuff that would cost like, $100 and up if you actually went out and bought the record or the tape. But they're bringing new ears to it. They're bringing new listeners to it, and they're introducing all this music. When you think about it, like if a record is pressed, 1,000 copies when it comes out and it's put out in the 1970s, before the internet, that record could only travel so far. It was like you either had to have a physical copy of it, or like a dub that your friend made on, like reel to reel or cassette tape. And nowadays, like, you have these people that take rare things and they dedicate their entire page just to kind of like preserving and ripping and sharing this music. Some of it gets like, 500,000 or 1 million views on YouTube. So it's like totally unearthing this stuff that would kind of just be like collecting dust on people's shelves if this curator wasn't putting it in front of people like you and me. I think that's really cool, and that's kind of like when you were talking about 1,000 spins, that's sort of the angle that I'm going at with that project. Is like, there's so much music on Spotify, there's so much, and it's hard to get the exact data for how much of it has less than 1,000 spins, but a lot of the songs on Spotify have under 1,000 plays. So my idea is like, why not make a hub to put all the things I like that need a little bit more attention and love, and maybe just by doing that, like, it'll bring some new listeners to it and give some of this music that came out a long time ago a second life, and then also help maybe some of the newer artists who are on there get discovered and get an audience as well.
And that, to me, because we grew up, I mean, we grew up in a time, I think we're around the same age, early 40s, that we grew up in a time where it wasn't always the there would be songs and things that are off the beaten path, so to speak, that you would maybe hear once or twice, and then they disappear after a while, and then after then you'd rediscover it, then you'd kind of like remember it, and it was just like, oh wow, I remember hearing this maybe like once or twice way back when, and now I can hear it whenever I want.
Right.
And there's a there's a band from the 70s from the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina called the Brief Encounter, and on Spotify one day they had because Discover Weekly, that's one of the few things that Spotify actually does well, in my opinion. This is the Discover
Right.
Weekly. Everything else is kind of like, but Discover Weekly is pretty good because it kind of like, it curates to your taste. And there was a song that this group had called Human. The Brief Encounter was called Human, and it sounded sort of like New Birth meets Earth, Wind, and Fire meets Chuck Brown and the Soul Searchers. And I was like, wow. And so I went and, just tried to find more as I could. And of course, apparently they had some stuff that was reprinted on Bandcamp and eventually moved over to Spotify. So these are just some like, some of the things that kind of catch your attention in the respect of, curation. But when you said that, people were calling you foolish for giving away sample ideas, but isn't that what, our era was about, those of us who grew up in the hip hop era? Because it was clear that, when hip hop first came along, that it was really more inclusive. I mean, it's not to say it's not inclusive now, but it was pretty much, share and share alike back then. So my thing is, why would it be considered a negative that you're giving producers ideas in an era that, quite honestly, needs ideas?
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting question, and I know there's always been it's a really good question. I think it's one that's good to think about in the, kind of like producer world. I know that, secrecy about sample sources that was a thing, for the early DJs and producers for a long time, like trying to find the record that no one else has, like trying to, flip the sample in a way. I mean, part of that is just to avoid like copyright laws sometimes, but part of it too is like, I think, a pride thing of kind of like being the only person to find this thing and reinterpret it this way. And I do get that, and I do get the idea too. I think, we're in an interesting moment where there's so many people putting out music, right? And it's hard for people to grab people's attention in like an authentic way and just really connect with listeners. Like, I think a lot of modern artists, people in music have this problem where there's so much coming at audiences, they can only handle so much. And so how do you make like an authentic connection with them? And then I think sometimes, like, we're all guilty of, if you're doing something creative, you try to maybe like think about the algorithm or think about what might be an easy way to get people's attention. So I do understand that that's like a fear. Oh, if this guy's just giving away samples, then it just makes it so easy for people to hop on and flip it, and it can like take some of the discipline for looking for new music out of it. But I also think, like, to your point, there's so much music in the world. I'm sharing 78 songs out of like a billion that I listened to and said, hey, there's some cool moments on this. that I think people could sample. Like, I want you guys to have these and see if anyone decides to do something interesting with them. And I also think too, when you look at the history of sampling, you can look at songs that have literally been sampled like thousands. I mean, there are drum breaks and songs that have been sampled thousands of times.
Yes.
And a lot of them, there's a lot of differentiation in the songs that sampled them. Like, there's a pretty interesting difference in all the different recordings that use that one original recording. So I think it was Blueprint, who is the producer and rapper, and he also has a podcast now. He was talking about this on Twitter a little while ago, and someone said, like, are there any sample standards that you wish would just kind of like go away? And he made the point of, we shouldn't want the sample standards to go away, because it's like a creativity test. If something's been flipped 2,000 times, like, can I come in as the producer and do it in a way no one's done it before? There's a producer named Soundtrack who did a Nautilus flip a couple of years ago. I think it was back in like 2020, that went kind of like viral. And I mean, if you know Nautilus, that's been flipped like a billion times by so many different people in famous and not famous songs alike. And he just came in with this totally unique way of doing it, and he had a good video to go with it, and it got him a lot of like eyes and ears and attention, and rightfully so. And he just took something that had already been done a bunch of times, and he put his own, you know, flavor to it, and it worked out for him. So that's always my philosophy. Like, there's so much music in the world. I just want to share it and present it in different ways, and I always think like the end goal of Microchop is get more people excited about more different kinds of music, and just help people discover stuff that they might want to explore more on their own.
And that's, you know, a very interesting, you know, answer, and well, you know, well presented. So when you talk about, you know, that variety thing, variety is definitely the spice of life, you know, when it comes to music, because like you said, there's just so much out there. Just what do you think the benefits are for people who may be stuck on a certain genre? Like, you know, there might be some people who just listen to a certain kind of West Coast rap, or people who listen to jazz fusion, or people who listen to punk rock, or people who just, you know, stick with 80s pop. You know, how does it make, how do you think, you know, expanding your musical palette makes you a better listener, not just a fan, but a listener as a whole?
That's a great question. A lot of really great questions these are things, all these things you're presenting are things that I also think about a lot. So I appreciate them, because I feel like they're stuff that I'm interested in and kind of have thought about a little bit. Interestingly, like, I've thought about the question you just posed, like being a generalist versus a specialist, like only listening to one genre or one niche part of one genre versus listening to a bunch of different genres. And I actually think that to have a healthy music culture, we kind of need both, to be honest. I would say, like, early in Microchop, I probably started out as more of a specialist and have moved a little bit more general. Like, I've kind of broadened the genres that I share, and that I present on like the social media feed and the playlists, all those things. In the beginning, it was, you know, 90%, if not more, instrumental hip hop and rap music were kind of like the focuses. And I think that's still a lot of what I share for sure, but it's kind of broadened from that a little bit. But I think for like preservation, and to help people who are new to genres, you need those diehard fans who like are really, really hyper focused on one thing. And I'll give you an example of like a time that this was really helpful for me. When I was I wrote an article about Memphis, like independently released Memphis rap tapes from the 90s, which are arguably, I think, like one of the most influential genres of music maybe ever, in terms of just how much they've influenced the sound of modern music and been sampled and interpolated, and, you know, from everyone from like 3-6 Mafia to, you know, producers like DJ Squeaky and DJ Sound and Grimm, who used to go by Lil Grimm, who's actually a really cool guy who I've gotten to interview. Like that whole genre and space of music is so interesting to me. It has such like a rich and complicated history. So I decided to write a piece about it back in 2020 for Reverb. It actually didn't get published until 2021. And one of the places where I found so much information and music that I could listen to help me with the article was YouTube. And it was all these curators where that was their main angle. Some of them like exclusively Memphis rap tapes from the 90s. Some of them a little bit broader than that. And it was like rare underground rap tapes from the 90s. But without those people who, you know, most of these albums, again, like some of them are on Spotify and stuff and have been remastered and reissued and released. But a ton of the stuff, I would say like more than half of the stuff that I was interested in learning about and writing about is only on these very rare cassette tapes that you probably wouldn't own a copy of unless you like had a family member who lived in Memphis, or you lived in Memphis, or you lived somewhere with like a connection where someone was getting them and selling them at a, you know, a mom and pop record store.
Right.
So, I mean, to get one now would cost, again, like a ton of money just to get one tape. And I was able to go on YouTube and listen to all these different recordings from that period of time. It was instrumental for me writing this article. And I don't think, like, if I didn't have those curators who kind of obsessively focused on this one time and region of music, I wouldn't have had that gift of that body of research that I could tap into that they put together for people like me. You know, both people who just want to listen to it, but people who want to like learn more about it and write about it too. So I think, you know, there was another writer who kind of sparked a conversation about this. Like, I always think it is a good thing to keep an open mind and like try listening to something new if you feel like it. But I would never criticize someone for just like, if someone told me all I want to listen to is rap music for the rest of my life, that's fine with me. Like, I think we need people who are that passionate about the genre and the artists in the genre to kind of like lead the way for people who might not know as much about it. Having said that, I think if you do listen to rap music, it's a great place, if you ever feel like it, to kind of tap in and explore other genres, because it samples like every imaginable genre. I mean, there's just no way I would be as into like 70s film scores and, you know, like random 80s experimental music if it wasn't for rap music. That's 100% what got me into all these other kinds of genres of music, is because I heard people interpolating it and flipping it and sampling it and putting their own spin on it.
Yeah, because and really quickly before I, you know, get back into my questions, it's interesting you mentioned like 80s, you know, like random stuff off the beaten path, because one of my favorite rap songs in college was the first from the Diplomatic Media album, you know, and there's that little part where it's like, you know, this kind of like screeching, you know, like I don't know if it's a horn or a synth line, but I went looking for the sample and it was done by the Alan Parsons Project. And if you're a Chicago Bulls fan of a certain age, you know that was their intro music for the that, you know, that particular song, but that particular band, the Chicago Bulls used as their intro music, you know, for Michael Jordan and them way back when. So it was like,
Cool.
so it's just like everything has a connection, and that's the beautiful thing about, you know, what you're doing with Micro Chop and 1,000 Spins, and, you know, just opening people's eyes to these different samples, because, you know, the music has to come from somewhere, and to see how people are using it is just like, you know, just it's a mind opening, mind boggling experience.
It is, and I love that story. There's a rapper and DJ and producer. Excuse me, my voice is like a little bit hoarse today.
No problem.
Keenan Bell is his name. So he actually did. We collaborated on. He did a video mix of 1,000 Spins. I can send you the link after we get off of this. Actually, where he picked. I think it was like 20 songs and put them into like you know, his own presentation and a DJ mix. But he said on Twitter a few times that like rap music was the internet before the internet. You know, it was
Yeah.
this way of like mixing with the music and the lyrics, like with the music taking pieces of stuff people might have recognized or made them curious about it, and then also with like the lyrics dropping all these different pop culture references and like historical references and things. And I think that's really true. I think to your point, like when you hear, that's one of the reasons I love sampling so much, and I'll always be really passionate about defending it as an art form. Like when you hear the Diplomats rapping on something, and the Heat Makers and the producers they worked with were really great at taking stuff that wasn't necessarily like in the sampling canon at the time, and doing cool stuff with that. I felt like their production. I graduated college in 2006. What year did you graduate?
07.
07. So yeah, I was thinking we might have been the same time, just because of, they were like, I remember them being so huge when they came out. I think it was like my freshman or sophomore year when Diplomatic Immunity dropped. But when you hear that, you hear it in a new context, and then it when you recognize it and make the connection to where the original comes from, it's such a cool moment. And sometimes it kind of makes you want to go back and explore, like, okay, Alan Parsons Project, like what about that group, or like what, you know, what can I find through that, what's interesting about that and that record that came from. That's sort of one of the things I love about the internet, is it just made it so easy to do that kind of exploring. And you can start with like a modern recording, look at what, I mean, I know there's some people don't like this aspect of it. It's so easy to find what stuff samples nowadays, and I'm totally guilty of like just looking it up sometimes in all the various resources. But you can find what something sampled, and then look at, oh, who produced the song that was sampled in the song? What's other stuff that they produced back in the 70s or 80s or 90s, or even closer to now? And then what music from them can I explore? And it's sort of like this infinite, you know, portal to discovery that you have. And I honestly think it's one of those things about music technology that I don't want to say that it's like totally underappreciated, and there aren't people. I think there are people like in decision-making spaces who appreciate how amazing and powerful this aspect of it is. But I also think sometimes as listeners, we forget that we're like living in this very unique moment where it's so easy to access music. It's never been easier for me to hear a song, love it, and then share it with you. You know what I mean? Or share it with a member or a friend. And I think there's something really powerful about that. I think we should all think about what we can. Everyone has their unique spin on what they can do with that tool, and I think we should all, if we're really passionate about music, like we should think about, how can I use this powerful thing and just use it to kind of like expose other people to new music, share music with people, help artists that I really love maybe get a few more listens. And I think that's a powerful thing too. Like a lot of times the most influential recommendation you're going to get is from not from someone like me, but like a friend or a family member, you know, someone you know personally who likes music and recommends it to you too. So
yeah. And you know, we've talked a good while about music, but I did want to get into the journalism aspect of it. And obviously we are watching whatever is going on in the world today. It boggles the mind, because, you know, I went to J school. I'm assuming you went to J school as well. You know,
I actually didn't. I didn't, and it's so we can talk about that. But maybe finish your question and then I can.
Okay. Yeah. All right, but yeah, but we're both writers. We'll just put it like that.
Yeah.
And journalists, and it's kind of frustrating to know that we have to sort of, you know, piece together this, you know, this living of sorts to kind of, you know, make people understand that, you know, media matters, you know, news coverage matters, journalism matters. And from the music perspective, because I can only speak through sports because I'm a music fan, but I'm a sports writer by trade. So, right. But for me, just, you know, watching, you know, you put together, you know, your newsletter, which I've subscribed to, Microchop, 1,000 Spins, just, is it a labor, I mean, obviously it's a labor of love, but do you wish that people gave journalism more respect than what people see on, like the legacy outlets, like the ABCs, the NBCs, and then, like the New York Times and the Washington Post? Because I mean, I've said it a few times, community journalism is the truest form of journalism there is. And I think what you're doing with music is obviously community journalism because so many people are benefiting from it. So,
Thank
yeah, so no problem. So my question is, do you feel like it's sort of like, ice skating uphill, so to speak, or do you feel like, we're going to come back around to a positive time where all forms of journalism, are respected?
That's such a great question. And it is a really interesting time for journalism. I don't think so. Let me synthesize my my thoughts, and I'll go succinctly, and then I'll go a little bit more broad.
Okay.
I don't like to be a pessimist. I don't think I like to be a realist mixed with some optimism. So I think if I look at it as a realist, journalism is in a really tough spot right now, across the board. And music journalism, certainly of all the subcategories, I think is really struggling right now. Having said that, I think there are people who continue to have been doing amazing work, continue to do amazing work in the face of like all the reasons there are not to, and just give up. There are a lot of people doing great work out there. So that gives me some hope. In humans are creative and innovative, and you never know what someone might come up with that could shift things in a better direction if they so choose to. I do think though we have to be realistic when we discuss journalism. And I've seen, I started writing in the blog era, right? So I started self-publishing in like 2007. I started writing for the smoking section, man, which was in 2008, I think was when I wrote my first, it was either 2007 or 2008 that I wrote my first piece for the smoking section. And at that time, we were seeing a lot of the same stuff that we're seeing now, like the '08 recession. Journalism jobs got, so many people. I mean, if you talk to anyone who was in print journalism at the time, they were saying it was just like everyone was getting laid off, like everyone they knew they were getting laid off, and everyone they knew was getting laid off in writing at the same time. When that was happening, I remember a lot of people saying, well, the old institution is crumbling, but something new will rise from the ashes, right?
Yeah.
So that was in 2008. We're in 2024. That's never really materialized fully for me. Like I when I'm just being honest about it and looking at what's happening, there's been so many iterations of, well, like this was a bad time, but it's going to get better. And I think if we look at, what happened with Complex getting sold off by BuzzFeed and some of the layoffs that happened there, if we look at Okayplayer with all the layoffs that happened about a year ago, we look at Bandcamp Daily and their layoffs, Pitchfork, like it's in a tough spot right now. There are still publications, there are still people making money from writing about music, but you have to look at what's happening and say, like the number of positions that can pay people to write about music continue to shrink, right?
Yeah.
So I think people should absolutely, like, I'm a big advocate of self-publishing. I've been doing it for a long time. Microchop basically started in 2016, just as a way for me to kind of put my self-published stuff like under an umbrella. I never imagined it would kind of grow to this thing it is today, but it was just a way for me to like interview some producers, write some articles about beat making and music production, and have it all sit in a place with a cool name. In a lot of ways, of all the things I've done, a lot of times when people find me, it's through something Microchop related. So like when I wrote for Red Bull, I did some writing for Ableton, I've done some writing for Roland. Like a lot of those people found me through my Microchop stuff. Reverb too, I wrote for them as well for a few years. And all of that has been like, someone saw an article that was put out on Microchop. I think almost all of those those gigs, and they reached out to me. So I think self-publishing is great. And if you have like the inkling to do it, starting a website with a blog section, a newsletter, there's a bunch of different like Substack like hybrid models where you can do the newsletter. It's kind of like a website newsletter hybrid if you want to start one of those. I think all those things are great, but I don't think they're the solution to what's wrong with journalism. Like, I don't think a million writers self-publishing and starting newsletters is going to fix some of the more entrenched issues. And I think what's troubling about it to me is I think we're seeing pretty clearly like people with deep pockets and lots of money in various sects of journalism are kind of buying it up and consolidating it. Like that's just that's not a conspiracy theory. If you study news media, like that's what's been happening for
absolutely
a long time, and there's always this tension point with journalism in whatever area it covers. I think we see this now. It's especially interesting. Like I'd love to hear about your experiences with sports journalism, because I think both sports and music journalism, you need a level of access to like either the athletes or the artists, and to write truthfully and critically about these entities, like whether it's a sports team or a coaching staff or a certain player, in the back of your mind, like you're thinking, if I write this piece that's about something bad this person did, or just like critical of their game or critical of this album or whatever, you do have to think about that might damage like my ability to get access to that person later, and also like the sphere of that they exist in and the people that like them and support them. So there's always this interesting kind of like dance that you have to do. And also, like, you have to try to make money, too.
Yeah.
And sometimes the people who are paying you money don't want you to write something overly critical about these things. So I think there's always these kind of, like, complicated and messy connections between the money and the institutions we're supposed to be covering and us, the journalists, like, trying to write truth to power, trying to cover things honestly and truthfully, trying to highlight like problematic or abusive behavior when we see it, but then also being employed and being able to get access to people who will do interviews with us for stories. Like it's a complicated thing. And I think we're seeing right now, like when the constrictions, when people are more and more squeezed for money because of just the way things are in journalism today, it can definitely be like a silencing factor in making someone kind of like soft pedal a story or not write it as honestly as they might have if they didn't have to worry about like career and financial implications of it. So I think I'm not hopeless about the future of journalism. I think I see a lot of people doing great work. I don't know what the future is going to look like. I do think just like the idea of there being like a publication, like lots of publications that have sustainable business models, that have some blend of print and online presence. I'm not saying places can't do that, but I think the number of places doing it and surviving that like I'm accustomed to seeing is probably going to be smaller than it was, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. I just don't really see, especially just with all the stuff I feel like it really rattled me just watching, Complex, Okayplayer, Bandcamp, Pitchfork, all of these publications too. You could look at them and say like they weren't perfect. There were aspects of that. I mean, Bandcamp Daily was pretty amazing. I feel like they were doing some of the best stuff around, but Complex and Okayplayer had like, I think it was the summer of 2020, like controversies around treatment of Black women in the workplace and like misconduct and things like that. And you know, so there are obviously like issues at some of these places, but they were also, that's not to totally like undo the fact that they were still important hubs for writing about and reporting on rap music and hip hop culture. So just to see those places like, you know, gutted and full, you know, not folded, but gutted, was really disheartening. And, you know, I know a lot of people just through like talking to them on Twitter who worked at those various places. And it's just hard to see so many talented people, you know, really scraping just to kind of put together a living. It's funny, like you were talking about at the beginning of the question, like cobbling together a living and trying to make it work. Like one of the things, I don't know if people realize this, but one of the things I've sort of had to let go of, I've sort of stopped trying to monetize microchop a lot. Like I do get some donations and contributions from people, but they're pretty modest. And I did the paid subscription thing. I did the, you know, like the paywalled article thing where you would have to, and it didn't work for me. I'm not saying if it works for someone else and it helps them make a living and make money, they should absolutely do it. For me personally, it didn't work. And I had to stop doing it after a while. It was just too stressful. And it was really like, especially when the pandemic hit and people were more stressed about money.
Yeah.
In cutting their subscriptions, I had a few people reach out kind of angry because they'd gotten auto renewed, who had subscribed for a paid subscription. They didn't realize they would get auto renewed. That happened a few times. And it just got to a point where it was like causing me a lot of stress and anxiety. And I was like, this just doesn't feel like, for the amount of money I'm making and all the like crap that's coming with it, it just doesn't feel worth it. So I'm fortunate in that I have, you know, a teaching job. My wife and I are teachers. So I don't have to like, you know, I have a salary job with benefits and I'm very fortunate to have that. But I had to kind of, there was a time where like, it was a dream of mine to maybe make writing my full-time career. And I just think for my own well-being, like I kind of had to let go of that a little bit, at least for right now, and just sort of do it as a labor of love and see maybe down the road something comes of it that does pay some money. But you know, I haven't made very much money at all from microchop like the last year or two. I would say it's more just something I do to do and because I love it, you know. And I've had to just sort of step back. I mean, I'm not writing, I don't know if you noticed, like with the writing pace too, there was a time where I was writing like, you know, 3 or 4 newsletters a week for a couple of years, and I just had to cut back on that. I mean, maybe do like 1 a month now or something, you know, a couple a month, if that even. So it's an interesting time. I would be interested hearing your thoughts on it, because I mean, you have books. I was looking at your books on Amazon. You cover HBCU sports, like you have, you know, your podcast and video show. That's a lot of different hats to wear.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's like takes a lot of time and mental energy. And I don't know enough about sports reporting. Like, do you feel like the institutions you're writing for and like what you're covering right now is pretty good, or does it feel like a little bit dicey, maybe like music journalism? I honestly don't know, because I just
Yeah. I think honestly, we're really in the same boat. We just have sort of, you know, different disciplines. The HBCU sports gig, that was a blessing in disguise. I mean, because I'd freelanced for them before, and then I had taken a job in PR, and I how much I hate public relations because the 2 public relations jobs I've had have just, you know, not been what I thought they would be. And
yeah.
so after I got cut loose from the last PR job, I spoke to the editor, the publisher, and I was like, "Hey, are you looking for any help?" He was like, "You've written for us before. You know, come on board." I mean, it was just like, you know, like I'm not a real religious person, but somebody up there likes me. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So it was like, okay, but at the same time, you know, I still had this, you know, dream of, you know, wanting to be my own sort of like multimedia, you know, because Tom Joyner is one of my idols, you know, the fly
Mhm.
jock. I mean, this was a gentleman that, you know, did radio shows in Chicago and Dallas every day of the week. They called him the fly jock for a reason.
Right.
He would get up and fly to Chicago, do the morning show, come back to Dallas at night, and do the same thing for 6 days a week. And the way Tom Joyner was able to take his media enterprise and build it up, he was one of my role models. But then I realized that this is it's not as I don't want to call it a sinking ship, but it's definitely some murky waters right about now.
Yeah.
And as far as sports goes, what you said is absolutely correct, because I have a basketball blog based here in Delaware called First Day Hoops Report. I cover high school and college basketball here in Delaware. Mm-hmm. And you can't have a less than glowing opinion about a team or a player, because Delaware is so small. The parents, their friends, the trainers, they'll let you know. The coaches, they don't really get too much into that. Neither do the athletic directors. But if you feel like if you say a kid could work on his left hand, or he doesn't play enough defense, or he's there aren't going to be any 6'3" centers in college, people take offense to that. Yeah. And it's really frustrating, because it's like, I'm not demeaning the kid. I'm just telling you what I'm seeing as a journalist. And it could just be really frustrating. And I mean, there have been times, there was a time during the pandemic when I was just starting out with First Day Hoops Report, and here in Delaware, they were really, really strict about, mask policy and all of that. And I didn't have a problem with it, because I got the shots as soon as they were available. I was not taking any risks. Yeah. But it was funny, because there was a young lady who's now at UMass, actually. And cool. She was playing. This was the first year during the pandemic, and she was leaving early. She was graduating high school early to enroll at UMass. She actually started most of the games last year. Her name is Stephanie Kaleja. If you ever go to a UMass game, I actually have two girls that I covered on the team that are from Delaware, Stephanie Kaleja and Dallas Pierce. If you ever go to a UMass women's game, they're really good. But cool. Stephanie was leaving early, and I asked, the athletic director, I was, because, you had to call ahead of time during the pandemic days. I was like, okay, I'd like to come cover this game. Here's who I am. This is what I represent, blah, 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 blah. He's like, oh, we're not letting anybody in. I said, okay, fair. So imagine my surprise to get on social media and find that the Gannett organization's newspaper was at the game. Mm. And I absolutely blew my top, like in a professional manner, of course. Right. And people were just genuinely surprised that sort of divide exists between, legacy media and independent community media. And there absolutely is a divide. There is a divide. And I don't think that people understand that. And this isn't taking away from anybody that has a legacy job or a, conglomerate media job, because I mean, if they're paying you, if you got benefits, you hold on to that joint as long as you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
But at the same time, it's disrespectful to feel like anybody who doesn't belong to, a Gannett or a McClatchy or a Koch or Coke or Cook or whatever they're called, mm-hmm. or iHeartMedia or anybody like that. Anybody below that tier is not worthy of the same consideration as far as access. And that's something that, I've had to fight, just from a local standpoint on a daily basis, just to cover high school basketball, which I think is egregious. But right. I love it so much that I'm willing to deal with it. And the people love. I mean, I get enough love from parents and coaches and athletic directors and principals where I can deal with like once or twice. But the one or two bad times, that doesn't outweigh the 25 or 30 who absolutely respect and love what I do. So, you, it's a labor of love.
Yeah, and no, that's really interesting to hear about, and that's another great point you make too, that we're still, it's a really interesting time. This is maybe like a sub point that I wanted to make on my earlier thing about journalism, and it kind of connects to what you just said, that there's so many voices now, right, with social media, with newsletters, with self-publishing, and there's a lot of amazing people doing it independently. I think some of the people who are sort of like, I mean, you see this in the political space, and I guess in the music space too, there's like some independent journalists and entities that it's more of like a clickbaity, exploitative
Mm-hmm.
model. And then I
Yeah.
think a lot of times everyone, if you're not part of like a bigger thing, or you're not under some umbrella that people recognize, you're sort of lumped in with those other spaces. You know what I mean? And it's unfortunate, because I agree with you. I think citizen journalism, independent journalism is hugely important. And I think we're seeing right now in a number of ways, just like the limitations. I think we need legacy news institutions for sure. And I think we should always try to work to like critique those things and make them better. And
Yes.
it would benefit our society greatly if those institutions um, had a broader array of diverse voices telling stories, if they were more able to be openly critical about different like political entities and powers to be with money and things like that. But I think even for all their flaws, like we need legacy media, but we also need smaller, independent, local establishments and independent people telling stories too. And I think kind of like I was saying before, like generalists and specialists in music listening create a balance. I think we need like a balanced ecosystem where there's, the big fish, and then there's the smaller entities too. And they kind of create it when there's like a robust and diverse range of both of those things, it creates a better system for everyone. And unfortunately, like we're seeing, it's just so hard to be one of the smaller people in those spaces. Just to have the money to stay afloat. It's really hard to monetize things right now. And I think a lot of times
Yeah.
people point to, it's so funny to me, like, when people say like start a podcast or start a YouTube channel, it's like they think that that's like instant money. You know what I mean? Like they
Yeah.
make one of
Right.
those things and then money starts flowing in, and it isn't that simple. A lot of times, like you're adding something else to your plate that might be a labor of love, but it also might just kind of like exist and not generate that much traction for you. So it's I don't know, man. It's a crazy time to be in this space, and especially like I feel like since going back to work full time um, in the January 2020, I took a few years where I was like part time teaching and writing. And then ever since I've gone back to full time teaching, and then my wife and I had our daughter Maisie 17 months ago, like, becoming a parent, working full time, this is definitely something I'm like kind of squeezing in, in whatever free time I can find. And I feel like as I've been doing that, there's been so many tumultuous changes in the last 2 years, that have really upended things a lot. So it's I'd be lying if I said it hadn't shaken me a little bit in my confidence that like some of the dreams I had around journalism might work out someday. But even though it's shaken me a little bit, I think we need people to keep trying and keep working at it and to keep writing, And luckily there's a lot of great people doing that. So
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, Gino Sorcinelli. Gino, thank you so much for joining me. Greatly appreciate it. Tell the people where they can find everything that you're doing. And again, people, it is a massive list. This gentleman works. So,
yeah.
so please tell people where they can find your stuff.
So my main, let's see, the main places to find me, Twitter is probably one of, Twitter and my newsletter. So at micro_chop is my handle on Twitter. And then I have a newsletter with over 3,000 subscribers now, microchop.substack.com. If you Google microchop, probably both of those things will be the first things you find. And then, as you mentioned, the 1,000 Spins playlists, which are on both my Spotify channel or Spotify account and my YouTube channel. That's where I collect songs with less than 1,000 plays on those platforms and put them into one big playlist. They both have, I think, around like 350 or maybe like close to 400 songs on both of the playlists. Now, and I actually made a Twitter account for 1,000 Spins. That's at 1,000 Spins. The actual name of it is less than 1,000 Spins, but the Twitter handle is at 1,000 Spins. And you can go there and you can find all the playlists. I'm also thinking tentatively about starting 1,000 Spins newsletter at some point, where I just send out like one track every day with just a couple sentences. I haven't done that yet because it's just like a little bit too much right now, but it's something I'm thinking about. So yeah, if people want to connect with me, Twitter and my newsletter are probably the best places to do it. And also checking out my Spotify, the Microchop Spotify page, and Microchop on YouTube are also good places to find me.
Ladies and gentlemen, Gino Sorcinelli. Gino, thank you for joining me today. Greatly appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. This is really fun, and I appreciate you taking the time to have me on and to talk, and I hope this was a helpful conversation for you and your listeners.